Good evening, and welcome to the Perfection Reflection Podcast, brought to you by Swansboro United Methodist Church, right there off of Highway 24 at 665 West Corbett. Why don't you swing on by and check us out sometime? We're here for the second month in a row to bring you a new topic of reflection, so get ready for your hosts, Pastor Adam and special guest host, Mark. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is a pleasure to be here again with you tonight to bring you a brand new topic. But before I get to that, let me introduce to you our guest special host for this evening. His name is Mark. Mark, would you like to address the audience for us, please?
Good evening, Pastor Adam. It is a pleasure to be here with you all this evening, and it's always been a dream of mine to be on a podcast. And I really hope not to let anybody down, especially you, Pastor Adam.
Oh, Mark, I seriously doubt that you can let me down, buddy. So let's go ahead and tackle this show together. What do you say?
Sounds like a plan to me.
So we normally go through the lineup, but before we get to that, tonight's topic is going to be looking at music. And I got a question for you, Mark.
Go ahead, Pastor Adam. I'm all ears.
So my question for you is this. Out of all the music you've heard in your life, which song has been the most influential in your life?
Well, Pastor Adam, I would have to go with the Beatles' Yellow Submarine. That may seem a little weird at first to hear, but, the song itself I absolutely love, We all live in a yellow submarine, a yellow submarine. I mean, you know the song, you guys know the lyrics, but to me, Yellow Submarine conveys an idea of being at peace, whatever that peace is for you, and we can all find that. And in a sense, we all, having found our own ways of peace, live in our own yellow submarines.
Whoa. I was not expecting you to go that deep. I mean, my favorite, most influential song was by Matthew West, talking about being fine. We as people tend to say, we're fine, oh, we're fine, oh, we're fine. Yes, we're fine, but we're actually not. We're broken. And we tend to walk around pretending we're fine, pretending we have peace, but in all reality, we're really struggling with a lot of stuff that we probably want to get out and share with other people, but we're afraid to do so.
That's a really interesting perspective on that song, Pastor Adam, because, I tend to say I'm fine a lot, but normally I'm really not. That's why I find my joy and fulfillment in hearing Yellow Submarine.
Well, Mark, tonight we're going to be talking about spirituals specifically, and how that has impacted all of American music.
Oh, wow. I never really thought of it impacting all of American music. Man, I look forward to hearing our guests talk about that.
Me too, Mark, but in order to do that, you got to stick around for the rest of the show. So let's run through this lineup real quick.
That sounds like a plan. Would you tackle that? Because I'm a little unclear right now as to what that is.
No worries, Mark. We appreciate you stepping in. Nate, our host, had other obligations and was unable to make the show, but don't you fret. He'll be back for the next one. So our lineup tonight, we're going to read some scripture about music. We're going to have a prayer. We're going to listen to our guests talk about spirituals, the foundation of American music. And then you and I, Mark, will have a little discussion about what our guests shared and how it relates to discipleship.
That sounds like a plan to me. I try and strive to be the very best disciple that I can be. As John Wesley would say, we're all trying to be perfected in love.
That's absolutely right, Mark, and that's the whole point of this show, helping people going on to perfection and love with topical reflection. So, stay tuned for our guests, stay tuned for the scripture, stay tuned for our prayer, stay tuned for the discussion. But before we get into that, let's check in with the latest church news and happenings. We've got one really important announcement for you this evening. So get ready and listen up. This is something you don't want to miss.
Hello, Dr. Lane, it's Pastor Adam at Swansboro. How's it going up there at base camp?
Hey, Pastor Adam, it's a bit chilly up here, but wonderfully crisp and invigorating. Woo, man, am I so excited about this upcoming journey to the summit. I'm starting to get more and more people coming and expressing interest and helping to shape and mold our children and youth ministry programs. Hey, how are things for you?
I'm doing great, actually, here in this nice, warm coastal weather. But hey, look, I've got some people here with me who are really interested in hearing more about this summit thing you keep talking about. They may have missed your first announcement as my guest. So can you fill them in on some of those details?
Oh, absolutely. More people, that's awesome. Hey, I'm glad that you all are showing some interest. So let me give you some more details about it. The general session, where all who have registered for the summit, will happen on July 31st from 12 to 3 p.m. in Building 3. Again, that's on July 31st from 12 to 3 p.m. Did you get that?
We sure did, Dr. Lane.
Okay, I'm just checking because the phones up here, they can have terrible reception and just cut off. I wanted to be sure that everyone had that July 31st date and the time from 12 until 3 p.m. locked and loaded for putting that on their calendars. So, hey, Adam, the goal of this summit, just to remind you, it's not only the sense of adventure and fellowship, but it's about the opportunity to build clarity, consensus around the direction of children's and youth ministries at Swansboro United Methodist Church. And we're going to do that through a fun, positive process that involves stakeholders in these areas of our ministries.
Whoa, was that not only a mouthful, but that sounded really intense?
Yeah, it certainly does, but it really is far more fun than it is intensity at work. I promise. When we are done summiting, you will leave wondering where that work actually happened because the climb will be so exhilarating.
Hey, I'm all for doing work without realizing I'm doing work. So tell me, though, what is the actual work?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The summit, it's going to produce 3 documents pertaining to each of these ministries. We'll work on the mission statement, determining the results, targeted audience, and how, and then our values, which encompasses the spirit in which our church goes about these ministries. And then lastly, we're going to work on 3-year goals with the 1-year benchmarks around those goals. All 3 documents will be aligned with the church-wide mission.
It sounds like the constructive content that we're going to be doing in this collaborative effort is going to carry on for years and have a great impact on our children and youth.
Hey, it sure will, Pastor Adam, and that's why anyone who has a vested interest in our children and youth, which is really everyone to some degree, should come out and participate. After all, what is a 3-hour climb to impact the lives of so many for years after? What an amazing opportunity to be a tremendous impact on the life of a child and youth.
I know you've said it twice already, but can you give us the date and time of the summit for those who may have got lost in the sauce?
There were a lot of details there, but yeah, sure will. Hey, it's July 31st. That's a Saturday from 12 until 3 p.m. So please, mark it on your calendars. I will have a detailed report next week of each of the sessions, so you'll know exactly how you'll plug into the trek that day. But for now, hey, just block off that date and time, and we at Swansboro United Methodist Church, we hope to see a wide variety of people involved. And I'll check in again with everyone next week.
Dr. Lane? Oh my gosh. Dr. Lane, what was that? Are you okay?
Adam, hey, Adam, sorry, the reception cut out. That was just an explosion to rid the summit of potential avalanches. I'm telling you all, this is going to be an awesome adventure. Hey, check in later. Our pallet of supplies just arrived. I gotta roll. Catch you later. Bye.
Bye. You know, guys, that sounds really awesome. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and get registered myself. I'm definitely not going to miss this and my potential influence on children and youth. So be sure to join me July 31st in Building 3 at Swansboro United Methodist Church.
This is the Perfection Reflection Podcast. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. All right, let's jump right into it, Mark, with going to our scripture reading. Would you mind doing that for us?
Not at all, Pastor Adam. Our scripture for this evening comes from Psalm 100. Hear these the words of God. Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all ye lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come before his presence with singing. Know ye that the Lord, he is God. It is he that hath made us, and not we ourselves. We are his people, and the sheep of his pasture. Enter into the gates with thanksgiving, and enter his courts with praise. Be thankful unto him, and bless his name. For the Lord is good, his mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth to all generations. The word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God. Everybody keep in mind that text, make a joyful noise unto the Lord. Keep that in mind. If you want, keep your Bible open to this scripture as we get to our guest interview, because Kristen is going to touch on many of these topics. So with that, let's go to prayer before we get into our guest interview. Let us go to God in prayer. Gracious and almighty God, we give you thanks for technology that allows us to be connected in this way, that we can still have these conversations about you, theology, discipleship, all that is your kingdom, and all the ways we get to enjoy your creation. Be with us throughout the rest of the show. Be with us throughout the rest of our day. Be with us throughout the rest of our week, that we may put into practice the things we reflect upon, so that we may be perfected in love. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Man, I'm so excited. Let's get on to the guest interview. What do you say, Pastor Adam?
I'm right there with you, Mark. Let's do it. It's time for our guest interview. She is beyond words of introduction, but she shapes and molds the minds of children. She brings passion, tenacity, and love in all that she does, so get ready for our guest to talk about spirituals, the foundation of American music. Welcome back to the show, everybody. We have our guest with us, Kristen Wisniewski, who is our newly hired choir director. It's a pleasure to have her on staff as she's bringing multiple talents and gifts to the table. She is the music teacher at Swansboro Middle School, and she's got two boys, Joe and Max. And she grew up with a Catholic background, is that right?
Yes, and what makes it very interesting is that my mother actually grew up Baptist, and she played piano for her church for a long time. So even though my parents chose Catholicism as their home religion, my dad was born and bred Catholic. We were exposed to many different types of religions. My parents were not, like, oh, let's put everything in a shoebox. People always say, well, you're white. What does a white girl that lived in suburbia her whole life in the 80s have to like this kind of music and be so passionate about it? Well, it stems from my grandmother, actually. She grew up in a small farm outside of Richmond, Virginia, and she actually had a black nanny who was a former slave. And my great-grandfather was very wealthy at one time, and unfortunately he drank his wealth away. And my grandma, her mom actually walked out on a family back when women did not do that. That's how bad things were. And so my grandma lost the black nanny, but she grew up with in her time, a very extraordinarily progressive sense of, it doesn't matter what color you are. I mean, everybody else was racist to the core around her, my whole entire family. I will own that. I mean, that's part of my history. But she grew up in a very, like, oh, well, let's, everybody's good. It doesn't matter what color your skin is. Everyone's the same. She was very wise. And I think a lot of that had to do with her nanny who taught her so many great things. And I remember my grandmother mentioning to me, this wonderful type of music. And we would sit down and we would just hum through those songs. And, she would be showing me how to make her biscuits or how to shuck the corn or, we'd be, my parents, let me spend some time on that farm. And it was still a working farm when I was young. So I had the opportunity to, really kind of get firsthand almost knowledge of this. My grandmother would talk about this extraordinary set of music that people use not just when they were sad or happy, but they used to save themselves, and they used to, celebrate everything under the sun. And she's like, and this is the kind of music that makes me happy and what I kind of grew up on. And I remember we used to walk down the road, her and I. She never drove a day in her life. And I was probably 6 or 7, and I'd hold her hand. I could still, it'd be hot, and the sun would be, we'd be sweating to death. My grandma would have on her pretty church white dress, and I'd have on my little sundress, my little pigtails, blowing in the wind, and we'd be walking down to this small white Baptist black church, and they were all black except for my grandmother. Like I told you, my grandmother loved everybody. She accepted everybody. My grandfather had no idea what she was doing. He thought she was going to a friend's house on Sunday. He would not have allowed that, okay? My grandmother never said anything about it. She just did it until I guess maybe he did find out. I don't know for sure. We just kind of kept going, and I thought maybe because I got older. I don't know. But at any rate, here we were. I don't even remember the name of the church. All I remember is walking up the first time, and they were singing, and it's so small, and the rafters were shaking. The whole entire building was shaking, and they were singing some spiritual, and I thought, oh my God, this is what I want. I want to be a part of this. I got to get to know this stuff. And I've always been attracted to this type of music. I remember, I took violin. I was not always a singer or a pianist. I took violin all growing up until I was 17 and very serious about it. My parents spent a lot of money on my music studies, and, the road was Juilliard, and, I was supposed to go off and become this concert violinist. And I remember classical music is wonderful, and I loved playing in the symphonies, but oh my gosh, I would just sit around and just jam to, I'd take out a spiritual I heard from church and just play around with that. And I was always so attracted to the rhythmic feel, always ever, So my grandma and I would sit there, and it would be 100 degrees in this church, and they're fanning, everyone's fanning, and, they got their big, huge hats on, and I don't know how these women weren't sweating to death, and the guys with their hats on, and the one suit they owned, and they were poor as poor could get, but they loved the Lord, and they loved that music, and it just inspired me to think, oh my gosh, like this, these people that really don't have much, they barely have a car, they barely have a house, they're so happy. They're so happy, you never saw them not happy. And my grandmother too.
We preached on contentment this past Sunday. So, and just in case you all haven't figured it out there, today's topic is on spirituals, the foundation of American music. And Kristen has shared with us a true passion for this and where it comes from. So what I need you to do is stick with us, because we're going to move into how music affects social change. We'll be right back. We want to thank you for listening to the podcast tonight. It's been brought to you by Swansboro United Methodist Church, your home away from home. Why don't you stop on in and see what's going on? We got ways for you to worship, connect, serve, and give. If you have any questions or ideas for future podcasts, please reach out to us at PR Podcast. That's P as in perfection, R as in reflection, podcast at swansboroumc.org. Stay tuned. There's more of the show to come. You're listening to the Perfection Reflection Podcast. Welcome back, everybody. Now we're going to jump in again. Kristen is still with us. We are going to jump into talking about how music affects social change. I took a class in seminary with a professor. Dr. Gunther was her name, and she was an organist, but she had a true passion for spirituals and wrote a book called In Their Own Words, where she had traveled to Africa and just really dove into it and tried to understand the rhythms and where they come from and what the words were meaning and what they were conveying to a particular group of people. So, Kristen, if you would, in general, how does music affect social change? Being a music teacher and seeing children being influenced by it and all.
Yeah, well, I got to tell you, I think it's everything. The arts really, that's how we change is through the arts, really, truly. Even more than voting sometimes, even more than politics, even more than, going to church or to religion. I think the arts are how we elevate what we know and we make it better or sometimes worse. Even Hitler had a culture and Hitler brought to it, and it wasn't just a bunch of guys marching around. Social change can happen in the least likely ways, and it could take a long time, or like in the 1960s, it can be like extraordinarily profound and quick and amazing and beyond words. We, as a society, I think social change is something that's happening so rapidly because of things like COVID and, these cell phones and the internet and, just think about in your lifetime and in my lifetime, just how extraordinary the things have, how we've changed. And it's always through the music. Music always reflects that. Sometimes it propels it. Sometimes it doesn't. Pieces of art, dance, whatever, I think they are the method with which social change happens. And I think one of the biggest, most profound examples of that is the African American spiritual.
Can you describe that?
Well, for so many different reasons. So you took a group of people who were living basically the same type of life for thousands of years. I mean, really, in all practicality. So you take the Africans, were living the same way for thousands of years with their tribal traditions and their music. And music was everything. As a matter of fact, they don't have a word for music. There's not one word in many African languages that is music, because music is so and which is weird for us to think about because, we're like, what? There's no word for music? How do they describe it? Well, it's so, everything is music to them. They sing every day. The drums is how they communicate messages. Their leaders are actually music experts, not political leaders. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, it's true. I mean, it's, the music is everything to them, and it's how they do everything. So you had a group of people who brought this tradition of music being everything to them, where they celebrated, they had funerals, they had whatever. I mean, everything of life, eating good, if someone was downriver and there was a good harvest of fish, I don't know if that's the right way of saying it, but, they would be drumming certain pattern and a bunch of people would show up and, get fish. I mean, the communication of music was just extraordinary and extraordinarily advanced. So they get to our country, they're sold like cattle, literally. And they end up, many of them, on plantations. And the plantations, the owners don't want them to be 100% what they call literate, but they do want them to know things. So they teach them the Bible. So from the time that they're born, they are taught English, they are taught the Bible.
The cherry-picked passages that...
Now, I want people to understand this, and I want to be very, very clear about this. This is not a racial thing. This is a cultural thing. So that's what I'm speaking about. I know a lot of people, they get on, well, you're talking about black music. Well, yeah, it is black music. But we're not talking about being black. We're talking about the Africans who came over to this country. This is the culture. Okay. We're not, this is not a race thing. So we often, get into this discussion of race, and it is an important discussion. But this is a cultural thing, and we have to look at it purely like that.
So this is about what a particular group of people brought with them in the dynamic of the horrific nature of slavery. Okay.
So we're not going to, we don't need to rehash what happened. We all know what happened. We've been in, history, and, everyone knows that. But what a lot of people don't realize is that these people took everything that they had and they would teach their kids, and their kids would teach their kids. So, you have all these generations. You have 3, 4, 5 generations of slaves who are teaching their children their African ways, but still maintaining a very American kind of, way of life as far as what they have been, given. So they're out in the fields, they're working like crazy, and they're singing songs the whole time. I mean, if you think about it, it's 120 degrees, it feels like, when, you know how it is when it gets here in the summertime. It gets really hot and humid. So, they're down on their knees, they're picking cotton, which I don't know if you've ever picked cotton.
Oh, I've heard of the nature. And
my grandmother made me pick cotton. She's like, you're going to learn how to do this. You're going to learn that there's a really, the ugly side to, the farming business. And they got, that cotton gin was everything. Let me tell you what, because picking cotton is not fun. It's very, my fingers got very bloody. I was not very, not on my top of list of things to do. No. So they have to do something. So they take these biblical characters that they're learning about and that they're being exposed to, and they're turning them into music, their songs, and they're just singing away the day. And then very, very quickly they realize, we can use this for our purposes and not for the purposes of what the slave masters or the plantation owners, we're going to start using this for our life, and we're going to start using this as a way to do everything that we want to do. So, they would start passing messages. So let's say, you are my cousin and you come to my plantation because you're a house slave. So a lot of the house slaves were the ones that were the bringers of the messages because they were allowed to travel between plantation to plantation. So they would give you a few minutes to catch up with me, and you would be singing, a song, and, all the while the slave master's like, oh, isn't that a nice new Bible song? Because you'd be Jesus-ing it and Moses and all those characters, right? Well, you weren't just singing about that. You were telling me all about what happened on your plantation. Maybe you had a baby, maybe our sister or whatever, another person got married. Or maybe it was time for us to leave on the quote-unquote train. The spirituals were filled with code words. So Moses meant something very specific. The color red meant something very specific. Canaan was Canada. I do know some of, not all of them, like, the song Wade in the Water. The people, they're talking about the river of Jordan. Oh, isn't that nice? They're talking about that Bible river. They had no idea that they were organizing massive movements of people.
Right. To get out, to get freedom.
Exactly. They had no idea that this was social change happening on the spot every day, every minute of these people's lives. So the thing that they added to the music was they took and I say I shouldn't say, they took the Western ideal of a beautiful melody, okay? And they infused their African rhythms into it, and that's what made it spiritual. And then, of course, their dialect. Okay, for instance, I have, this is straight from the source. I'm just going to read real quick. Gimme dat old-time religion. Gimme dat old-time religion. It's good enough for me. And if you look at how everything is spelled, a lot of it's for us, our teacher would be like, oh, you're going to fail that because you misspelled half the words. But this is how they saw it, like gimme, Gimmie, that was DAT, okay, and that was grammatically, just like their vernacular, just like today, a lot of, American culture, a lot of people in America have their own way of saying things.
Or Ewins or carts and buggies, we all use different.
Lord was LAWD, not Lord, LORD. I just was JES, not JUST. So they have this really interesting way of taking our language and making it their own, but not so different that they're really, putting on the radar what they're doing. And they got away, quote unquote, with this for a long time. And you think about all the thousands of people that were, that did have the chance to get to the North for freedom and that were saved from that horrific lifestyle just because of the music. It's pretty profound.
I remember I did an oration speech on Harriet Tubman, and they
Mm-hmm.
talked about, the trains are coming, right? Was a song, and it was really conveying, look, here,
You better get ready.
coming and get on it, and, and people were none the wiser, right? Oh,
A lot of people, which is incredible. And we're still, to this day, we're still learning. A lot of these things that I'm talking about are things that I didn't even realize until I've done, really deep research into this. A lot of this is pretty new knowledge from research. One of the biggest proponents of is that, and I wish that, it's very difficult to get tickets to this museum, that the Museum of African American History up in Washington. They're really putting a lot of money into research and trying to figure out exactly how all this worked, because not only was it the music, but it was things like quilts.
right.
Another very innocent, like a quilt. Oh, how nice. How sweet is that? But they're finding out that each of those quilt squares gave a direction, like be here at 2:00 on Sunday. I mean, that specific would announce things, like I said earlier, births and deaths and things like that, generic knowledge of, celebrations or that kind of thing. It really is extraordinary when you think about how not only social change, but how it just carried a whole group of people for a long time and helped them make their life palatable, because they knew that the life after was going to be so much better. And that's how they viewed it. They viewed it, okay, I'm gonna deal with this now, and they dealt with it so amazingly well. I mean, if you think about it, they didn't complain. They couldn't. They would get beat to death, So they day in and day out and day in and day out. There was no vacation. There was no nice big meal on Christmas. It would be the scrap, whatever was left over. Some of the slaves, of course. I mean, like every kind of servant relationship, some of them had it a little better than others. But then you have what happened was, Lincoln came along, and a lot of these Americans who thought, wait, we got to help these folks out. This is ridiculous. We want to get rid of this. And the Civil War was not just a slave issue. The Civil War was, again, a social issue and a states' rights issue. And it became a slavery issue. So after the Civil War, and these slaves, all of them were quote unquote free. A lot of them weren't free at all, and a lot of them were actually in a worse position. So what happens is that the music changes to reflect what's going on. And what do you think? What kind of music do you think happened right after the spirituals kind of started losing their grip, because they socially didn't need that as much anymore?
I start thinking of songs like "We Shall Overcome."
Well, that's a little too far forward thinking. It's actually the blues.
Really? Okay.
So we go from, this really huge, like, group effort of making music, the spirituals, to a very individualized. Blues, when you think about it, is very, very individualized. It's the person singing with a guitar or whatever kind of instrument they can, and it was all about sadness and getting through life. Life is tough, and my man did me wrong, and my God did me wrong, and it was, and that's exactly what it's trying to convey, is that just that exasperated feeling of just like, wanting to give up, but you can't. So even though we think, oh gosh, the Civil War happened, and, we abolished slavery, and Lincoln did this, and all this great stuff happened, there was still a whole generation to almost 2 or 3 generations afterwards that were still living in extreme poverty, that were still almost worse off, because at least the slave got fed. A former slave, that person didn't get fed all the
So
time.
would it be fair to say the blues may have been like a musical expression of lamentations?
Absolutely. Yeah. And then culturally, because like I said, music, propels social change and it shows what's going on in society. Um, we get to the like 1920s,
Okay.
between 1910 and 1920. A lot of things happening, a lot of good things. We're talking pre-depression, okay? Um, in New Orleans, a very unusual, not unusual, but they're starting to create jazz. But they don't know it as jazz yet. They're just kind of coming, they're kind of New Orleans is kind of like its own little place back
Right.
then.
Oh, yeah, it's still.
Highly recommend if you've never been there, folks, you gotta go. And they were having these, they were kind of taking these slave songs and they were adding all the wind instruments like tubas and trumpets and saxophones, whatever they could find, whatever they could, buy cheaply or even make cheaply. And they were just literally parading them around, especially for things like funerals.
Right. I've heard about the New Orleans funerals and the.
It's like crazy. It's like these funerals, they're happy. And they're still doing that today, by the way. All of a sudden, of course, like a lot of things, people start, oh, this is cool. Let me, my cousin heard this style and let's try and do this here. And it kind of started spreading very, very quickly, this jazz sound. So we go from the spiritual, which is a very group oriented, response to what's going on and to, really propel that whole Underground Railroad to the blues, which is about, exasperation, loneliness, anger. And then all of a sudden, jazz brings us to the happier part, Things are starting to look up for a lot of these African Americans. They're children of slaves, you know what I'm saying? Grandchildren of slaves. They're starting to do better than their parents and their grandparents. They're starting to find work. And where are they starting to find work? Big cities. Detroit, New York, Cleveland. They're just, these places are exploding with growth of the African American, culture and community. And a lot of the other folks in America, they love this jazz sound. They can't get enough of it, And in the 30s or the very, very late 30s, after the Depression, we can't escape it. It's huge. It's everywhere. It's kind of like our pop music today.
And when I was taking history of rock and roll in college, in my undergrad, it was just kind of like one of those fun classes, but I really learned a lot. In that dynamic of these things happening, there were white artists that would then almost commandeer it, and then they would get the credit for it. So, for example, Elvis Presley was not the first rock and roll. There was Little Richard, Fats Domino, all.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh, so many. Oh
When
god.
you think rock and roll, you go to Elvis, right?
That's right. That's right. And you can't. I will give this to Elvis. Elvis came out at the right time. He had the right look. He was dark, but not too dark. You know what I'm saying? He had the dark hair. He was good looking. He was young. He grew up very poor. Had a really kind of a troubled childhood. He was attracted and grew up around this. That he would go to church with these African Americans. I mean, he was very well versed in this type of music. I mean, he grew up listening to spirituals. You can tell. You can tell by how he presents his voice and how he sings always, He's he really what he allowed to happen was he took all of this great stuff that the black culture was doing musically and he brought it to mainstream America. And, that was a big social change. I know that personally, like my mom was a huge fan and my grandfather thought he was the devil, literally thought he was the devil. There was a huge disparity. My mom, as a matter of fact, I have her records. She had to hide them under her bed so that my grandfather, like, he had no idea. Like, she literally had to hide these records. Now we think of Elvis as being so innocent, but that gyrating of the hip,
right.
that was hugely, like, oh my gosh. And one of the best movies that kind of broaches this topic is Hairspray, the original. I don't know if you've ever seen the original, but a lot of it's about it's the early '60s. Things haven't changed too much from the '50s, so these white kids are really attracted to this new sound, which is rock and roll, which really honestly is a heavy blend of those rhythms from the African American spirituals, those heavy African beats, syncopated beats, with country music, like the nice little melodies, as the blending of those two. So you're very right about the whole Elvis. And again, huge social change. What do we have happen in the 50s? Well, teenagers. You know what I'm saying? Like before that, teenagers wasn't really, the 40s maybe a little bit, but the 50s really gave rise to the teenager. So now culturally, we have a whole new subset of people, right? So you're not just a kid. You know what I'm saying? Now you're a kid plus. Before so that whole like now teenagers, they have their own culture completely, and it's totally accepted and totally normal. But back then, the music was kind of allowing this to happen because the music was so different, and the parents hated it so much, and the kids were like, that. It's like the best way to get back at your parents is to, listen to music that they don't like, and they didn't understand it. It's like today with rap, which, I'll get to in a little bit, but it just, again, spiritual to the blues to jazz, and now we've gotten into rock and roll. And rock and roll, it's still a big, huge thing, and it really, I don't think it's going anywhere. It keeps changing, but, the whole umbrella of rock and roll.
So then the next segue out of rock and roll probably is more so the We Shall Overcome that I referred to earlier a little prematurely.
Yeah, no, you didn't, because this is kind of confusing. So all the while that these types that I just mentioned were happening, you get this out of the blues and the spiritual came gospel. And there's two different types of gospel music. There's the mainstream, the white gospel, and the black gospel. And that we're talking, from the 20s and 30s. And they were very separated. They were talking about the same stuff. They were speaking about God. They were speaking about the Bible. So gospel music on both ends was born out of this intense need to really express oneself religiously and in church, and to have, a way to really put the words, or in a little bit different of a way, what the preacher was preaching about. You know what I'm saying? Like what we do now. Mm-hmm. Be an offshoot of what, Sunday's all about. So gospel music, and it's kind of funny because I don't really think that the white church knew what the black church, and I don't think the black church knew what the white church was doing, because again, it's still very segregated. Okay. But it's a cultural thing, not necessarily race. It's just how we're segregating cultures is by race. Okay. And when rock and roll happened, that's when, people started really, wow, these are pretty similar. They're not totally similar, but they're pretty similar. You know what I'm saying? So today these types of music are all kind of just melding together. The 60s, We Shall Overcome, the 60s, that was such a period of intense social change. I don't think we'll ever be able to replicate that. I could be here for the next 3 hours talking about the 60s because so much happened. But again, it was the music that really pushed the agenda. At that early 60s, you still get songs like The Twist, which is very 50s sounding, So we go from that to, by the end of the 60s, we have an explosion of music. We have like over 50 different types of rock and roll, where we started with basically one. Now we have over 50 types. I mean, we have the evolution of heavy metal. We have the very, very beginnings of hip hop and rap. You have Motown. You have, like psychedelic rock. You have folk rock, with Bob Dylan and that kind of stuff. So really, depending on what...
Probably in the mix. Oh, okay. So I'm jumping ahead all the time here.
So the 60s, like I said, you have women who are finally able to have a voice. Yeah, I mean, let's not forget, women really didn't have too much of a voice. You had the Ella Fitzgeralds, and that was kind of unusual. You had the Aretha Franklins, that was getting a little bit more typical, but we really have a lot, women, and as a woman, have a lot to thank those early artists, because they had to give up everything to do that. Like they had to literally give up everything, because, it was a boy's business. It was a man's world. So again, you have that gender issue too. But you have all those, like people don't realize it wasn't just civil rights, it was gender rights too in the 60s.
Right.
You and I can have the same job, right? The same exact job, the same exact tasks, the same exact hours, but you would have been paid almost twice as much because you were a guy.
Struggling with that.
Yeah. So even though in 1964 you have the Equal Rights and Equal Pay Act, it's still not completely, but again, music has always been the driving force and is still discussing things like that and will be the platform, I think, forever that are, and I'm not just saying music, just music because that's my expertise, but all the art forms, music just has, I think, a little bit more profound of a way because especially a song. When I was thinking about this podcast, I was trying to think about what to talk about. I would feel amiss to mention this. We're really specifically talking about songs because within a song, you have the musical art form with the instruments, but you also have the poetic, the words, which really drives that point home. So not only are you driving whatever the theme of the song is through just the beauty of the music or what the music, sounds like, you also have the words that drive home the point even further, and I think much easier.
The reason the King James Version was written the way it was to be poetic so that it could be read out loud because the king didn't want you to own a Bible, but you could listen to it. And so the translation of the Bible was influenced by the audience that was going to be hearing it.
And the music that was back then was very, we've just seen over the past 100 years such extraordinary advances. I mean, it was quite dry for a while, but it wasn't like social change wasn't happening. It just wasn't happening at a rate like it is now. And I think, even today we're seeing such extraordinary shifts and changes. And, it's like almost mind boggling when you think about, since really the 60s. The 60s was just.
So if I had to ask you an off kind of question, so we started with the spiritual, and a culture of people brought with them in the midst of slavery and everything that they were dealing with, expressing that through music and rhythms. Where has the spiritual taken us today? Like, where do you see what's like the musical thing today that it's?
The rhythm. Absolutely. Those beats that we're attracted to, that we want to dance to, that we want to listen to, those are from the spirituals directly.
That's where like rap or.
Like I told you when we were talking about this, and audience, I know you don't realize that we had this conversation, but, I said, if there was no spirituals, there would be nothing. We would not have, there's no way, there's no possible way. Because the beauty of rock and roll is you take the beauty of that melody that was so Western, from Europe, we think Mozart, Beethoven, the beauty of those classical melodies, and you add that really syncopated beat that the Africans used in everyday life for every task. That's what created rock and roll. That's what's created rap. That's what's created all that. Okay. The only difference between rap and hip hop and rock and roll today and all, if you stack all those genres on top of each other, is how they're performed.
Mm.
The music's the same. It's just how they're performed, the instruments. You could take a country song and, and make it a rap song. And you could take a rap song and make it a country song. But, it's just in how it's performed, really. And how the person sings it and how many instruments, that's that. And you could make that argument really for any type of music, but it's especially true for popular music.
So tie in with faith and, theology, what I hear in this is a musical tenacity that's embodied, that, for example, when someone was singing a spiritual, what it means to actually sing of deliverance and believe in it and embody it and take that and then take a typical worship service where we sing hymns or have contemporary music and they're wonderful, but I don't know that we necessarily sing those songs with the same kind of embodiment or hope, expectation, intention,
And a lot of that has to do with the culture of the church, and nothing against church. I mean, really, because we like to be so formalized, and that's the biggest issue. We have to maybe strip away some of that formality. And when you strip away that formality, like today I had Joe on the drums, and I tried to, move us over to a different, and when you're just, and kind of like the three guys singing today was so cool. Because it was just them singing. And that's what a congregation, and any congregation, and I've seen a lot of congregations in my time. I've worked with a lot of all different faiths, not just Catholic, but not just here. I worked across the street for a while. I was accompanist over at the Baptist church for a while. Here, I've been to, other Baptist churches in the area as well, and other Catholic churches, and we make it too special. Music should not be special. You know what I'm saying? Music should just be part of it, and we shouldn't even look at like the Africans do. Don't have one word for music; they just do it. And if we just continue to teach, quote unquote, our the congregants and the people that go to church of any faith, music is, we got to stop looking at it as something special and just looking at it as part of what we do and how we worship, because what it does is it takes whatever, topic at hand, and it just elevates it that much more, and it just allows it to seep into your soul if you let it. But you got to stop looking. It's not something special. It should be part of it, and just be what we're doing,
And it also reminds me of when we were talking about the hardest thing to explain as a pastor is if somebody comes up to you and says, explain to me the Trinity. God is one being, but they're not the same, but they are the same. What the best metaphor I ever heard to describe it was a professor who related it to a musical chord. That you have a G note, a D note, or an A note, and when you play them together, they make this unique chord. And that's kind of what the Trinity is, in harmony with each other. And in a way, music really does convey true community, because all of these pieces have to come together in such a way that this beautiful song comes out.
So I encourage people to sing. Just sing.
We got spots on the choir. You can come.
You have to be a part of the choir. Just in your seat, sing, and not be afraid. Okay, first of all, it's not. I think people think of singing as something so specialized, and it's not. I mean, for me, yes, it has to be, because I have to understand the music. I have to direct it, so of course I have a lot of education, a lot of experience with that. All directors should. But the typical person does not need any experience. They just need to open their mouth.
Joyful noise.
If you think about it, look at your two little boys. They're always singing. They're always participating with music, right? We beat it out of kids. By the time they get to elementary school, we make it something special because we put it into a class that they meet once a week. And then they don't do it anywhere else. And it's like, oh, let's go to church once a week, and we don't do it anywhere else. So they're not doing it in their faith classes. They're not doing it at meetings. And and I hate to say this, but this is, I believe the truth, until we make music like a part of everything, somehow, it's always going to remain special, And as a culture, we still treat it like something we listen to or entertainment. I can't wait to go visit that concert. Why can't we just have concerts on the street? I'm surprised that in this COVID age, we don't have more musicians just playing outside. That's the one thing that is the one thing that shocked me. Because, I know my kid brought his drums outside a couple times, and the neighbors were like, oh, a little bit too loud. But, I don't know why we're not just playing outside more.
And in a way, it's almost exceptionally inviting to join in with whatever that person is doing in whatever way you join in. And it's okay to do that, because that's what it is. That's what it's about. Honestly, music conveys the very foundation of what we believe as Christians. To be in community with God is, I may not sing the best, but I play my part in the complete song.
And I think what Kevin did today was extraordinary. And I hope you guys can do more of this. Okay. I'm looking at you like,
Kevin sings a lot better than I do.
And I know you sing. You're not going to make me not believe that you can't sing. But it was just the authenticity of it. And people were they were getting into it.
Right.
They're being a little shy, but they were still, It's so, oh, wait, wow, the preacher's, oh, okay, so maybe I should try if the preacher's doing it. So we have to lead by example, you know. I think, you know, we are definitely on the right track, and we've had a lot, you know, I've just think so many Sundays, every Sunday's been absolutely amazing. But like, you know, the spirituals, those slaves, they did something called ring shouts, and it was a dance, and it wasn't a dance recital, and it wasn't a dance class, and it wasn't just, you know what I'm saying? It was for everybody. So even if the guy with the one leg, you know, or the person with one arm or whatever, everybody's dancing and everybody's celebrating, and they're just doing it because that's what you do. And sometimes we need to do a little bit more of that, you know, like I know this is kind of strange. I know some people are like, well, you're a musician, so of course you're going to do this. Well, no, we've always, every Christmas, music is a huge part of what we do. And yes, I play the piano, but everybody else, you know, they sing and we gather around and have music time. And sometimes we just, you know, sit around and jam.
Right.
And it's just, it could be awful or great. And sometimes it's been like, oh God, we really are bad. But, you know, we just don't do enough of that. And where they used to, you know, back in 1905, I think it was 92% of all American homes, middle class and above, had a piano. 92%. There was Tin Pan Alley in New York City. It was like a couple streets. I can't remember exactly which streets they were. I know Broadway was part of it. But anyways, it's a small neighborhood. Every building was a piano maker. And they had like over 2,000 piano makers in New York City alone at one point.
We're losing sight of all of that.
Yeah, I mean, like we don't, you know, the piano, it just sits there collecting dust.
It is. My grand piano that I don't. And some of them, right, come with recorders where you can just hit play and it'll play itself for you, right?
But I'm telling you, you know, because again, it's like a special thing. It's like a class you take. You know what I'm saying? Where every single one of these instruments that we use right now was developed by a person who didn't know what they were doing, just kind of came across it and it worked. And every single one of these instruments were developed for everybody.
Without exception.
Like the recorder.
Right?
You know, like you do that, and how much
PTSD from the recorder.
We turn it into a competition. Like seriously, you know, because everything is a competition. When you think about music, like, you know, even I have to quote unquote do that because, you know, that's what we're supposed to do. But really, in reality, there's nothing wrong with having competitive groups. I'm not saying that, but when it comes to everybody, we should just be making music all the time. And music should be so much like in a language arts class, you could, you know, play music. You could, you know, sing chant poems. You know, in a math class, you can, you know, take apart rhythm and do rhythm, and, you know, fractions and rhythm works really. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people can incorporate. And here in church, to elevate our experience and the worship experience, we need to continue to make music and not always make it so formally. You know what I'm saying? Like when we have the prayer time and people are calling out people's names, you know, like what Kevin did, he took his sermon, he found something that kind of fit, something that, you know, hit home with him. You could definitely tell he loved that piece of music and he just sang it. It was so authentic. That's what we need to bring more back in, you know. I mean, of course, the choir is going to have to practice. I mean, that's, you know, that's a given. That's, you know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about just the generic experience of everybody. You know, I'm planning on going into every single class, you know, at least, once every other month. Each week will be a different class, faith formation, and showing them how to read the music and giving kids lessons on, you know, how do we participate with music so they're not so scared of it.
Well, and that's something we want to try and incorporate into this is always a challenge for us to help us go on to perfection from this reflection. In that, Kristen, here's her challenge from what I hear is let go of the formality on music a little bit, maybe get a little more footloose and free about it, and really just sing. Let your love, let your praise for God, for all that God does for us, just let it shine through in whatever way it can without care or worry. And embody that. I think Kristen hit it on the head when she talked about authenticity. When we choose to come to people authentically, all our mistakes, all our brokenness, all of that, it resonates with people. And if we can find ways to do that through music that invites them to join and be a part of that without exclusion, I think we're continuing down the right path.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that you have to change things too much, because it's really not about change, because people are so scared of change. But change does have to happen. But we're talking about just little ways, like, again, doing what Kevin did today, or maybe me stepping away from the piano, just walking around congregations, singing, encouraging people to sing, something simple, something, whatever, there's lots of ways we can accomplish this, just teaching the kids how to use the books and how to use the hymn books, and people too. I mean, I could give a lesson to the adults, because I bet you that most adults are probably still like, because it is confusing. We have 3 books.
Well, and in case you all Methodists didn't know, Charles Wesley was quite the hymn writer. So John Wesley, his brother Charles, they put together quite the expanse of music for us that we sing today. And it's amazing that all of this connects back to.
It really does. Now, of course, you have hymns that happened before and without context. I mean, you are, but most of these are going to have some kind of influence of that, because right now, I mean, it's so much a part of our vernacular, the musical vernacular. I mean, I have a book here, I know y'all can't see it, but it's called Songs of Zion. And it's got like 600 songs in it, and they're all from just about, if they're not directly a spiritual, they are because of a spiritual. They're all based on that, type of music. So a lot of those tunes we just know because movies, TV, church, whatever, all the different places that we hear music that we're not even really realizing that we're listening to it. And that's the whole point. These spirituals were meant to be for everybody. They weren't meant for a soloist. They weren't meant for one person to sing out in the fields all by themselves. They were meant to the children, the old, everybody participated, They were meant to comfort. They were meant to heal. They were meant to, get through the day, get through the heat if need be. They were meant to celebrate. They were meant to share condolences. They were meant to send messages. They were, used for the Underground Railroad. They were used for every single thing that they could possibly use with regards to their life and their, what was happening at that particular moment. And unfortunately, there are ones that we have lost that we'll never know what they sounded like. But fortunately, we did have enough people who had the foresight, because they weren't written down. It's not like music. Yeah. They were just sung and they just, kind of passed hands down by singing or by performing them. So thankfully, we did have people who had the foresight, we need to start writing this down before this is lost. Because it could very well have been an art form that was lost, and we would have no idea about the richness of this tradition, and I think we would have not had the rhythmic possibilities that we have now quite advanced. I mean, some of these rhythms are like, whoa, and they're really in music right now. And, if you listen to the typical pop song, you're going to hear some pretty complicated rhythms. If you were to look at what they look like in notation form, you'd be like, oh my gosh, not just a bunch of quarter notes. You have dots everywhere and ties and all kinds of different stuff. So the arts have always been the transporter of social change and the way that we make social change happen. And also I think of how I want to put this, the method of how we carry this through and the history, so that me, as a white woman living in 2021, I can reflect upon these songs and think about them very deeply. So I'm not just singing a bunch of notes pretty on a page, that I'm understanding what they mean and where they came from and that significance. So I think that's important.
I don't know any other way to best to end talking with you than that point. But Kristen, thanks for being with us. That wealth of information, be on the lookout because Kristen's going to be coming around to inspire your musical gifts and talents. Everybody has some kind of musical gift or talent. Just need some nourishment. So be on the lookout for Kristen and stick with us for the rest of the show.
Oh, it seems like things are getting to the end. They're going to wrap up soon.
That's right, Mark. All good things must come to an end, and we're getting ready to wrap up the show. But there's a couple things we need to run through real quick for our audience out there on ways they can plug in here with us at Swansboro United Methodist Church.
That sounds absolutely wonderful. I'd love to learn how to plug in more here. This seems like a really wonderful church.
It is, Mark, it is, but I'm a little biased as the pastor. Maybe you might want to listen up here and find ways in which you can plug in.
I'll definitely be listening.
So first off, if you have an interest in keeping our spaces safe and secure for those that come to worship on Sunday mornings, we need some people on the security team. So if you like keeping people safe, you enjoy worship, you enjoy socializing, and you got an eye for making sure things are okay, please sign up for the security team to work at either the Daymark service at 8:25, the Beacon service at 10:30, or the 11 o'clock traditional. You can reach out to the church office or contact Kevin Frazier. We also want to lift up Vacation Bible School, which came to a close last week. It was a wonderful opportunity for our church to share God's love with the children of our community and the adults. We give thanks to all those who volunteered, all those that participated, and we look forward to another successful Vacation Bible School next year. And finally, on August 16th, we are having a concert in Building 3 to celebrate our 150 years of ministry this year. We've been doing a series of these events. They're free to the public. We invite you to come and enjoy. Be on the lookout on all our platforms to stay up to date on the latest church news and happenings.
I don't know how anybody could not get super excited about any of that stuff. I'm going to go sign up for all of it right now.
Well, Mark, you want to be sure not to burn yourself out. Why don't you start with, you're a pretty big burly guy. Why don't you start out with the security team?
I'll definitely do that. I'll give Kevin Frazier a call. Thanks a lot, Adam, and thanks you all for putting up with me out there. I hope this isn't the last time that I get to join you on this podcast.
It won't be, Mark. So, as always, this is Pastor Adam.
And special guest host, Mark.
Signing off. We'll see y'all next month. Thanks for being with us.
Bye.
It's been a wonderful evening sharing this time with you. Tune in next month, August 31st, the last Tuesday of the month, for our next reflection. We're going to be looking at barbecue. Stay up to date on the latest church news and happenings through our Facebook page, our website, and the weekly emails. You've been listening to the Perfection Reflection Podcast, brought to you by Swansboro United Methodist Church. Have a good evening, everybody. Grace and peace.